Jest.
So Graal was originally development tools for independent studios to use to build their games. Unixmad and Bomber's game engine tools were a failed business. They were trademarked as Graal Online, although they weren't even making money. Anyways, they stole my game studio because I was one of the game studios using the engine, and they renamed it from Antago Press because I was too young to be able to understand or do anything about it. And they renamed Antago Press to Graal Online, a second trademark, the same name as the game engine. However, it's a separate business and a separate trademark. Then they shut down the game engine and told all of the game studios who were using the engine for years that if they wanted to continue to use the game engine, they would now have to publish their games under my studio, which they stole. Then they banned me from my studio, my games, and slandered me because I was just a kid. They brainwashed me and told me I had no rights, that I don't understand business, that they can do whatever they want, that if I upload things through FTP, that means they owned it. And so there's all these lies that, now that I'm an adult, I'm able to unweave a lifetime of brainwash. There was more money in the game publishing than there was in the engine that they built. And so they created a separate business, which is my game studio, and then forced all of the other game studios to start selling their games to my studio, which they renamed to Graal Online. So if you can understand that, this video is going to make a whole lot of sense to you. To prove to you that every one of you are susceptible to brainwash, whether or not you believe it, we're going to take a quick pop quiz. If you get any one of these wrong, and you feel like you are not motivated to look up whether or not this is true, you are susceptible to long-term brainwash. True or false? It is illegal in Oklahoma for the owner of a bar to allow anyone inside to pretend to have sex with an animal. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. True. It is illegal for a bar owner to allow anyone to pretend to have sex with an animal inside of the bar. True or false? Due to excessively high crime rates in Detroit and limited judicial resources, laws have been passed after the 1970s whereby if an adult male is mugged on a back street after curfew, he may sue for only 30% of the damages to avoid overcrowding the courts. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. There is no law limiting how much you are permitted to sue for when you are robbed in Detroit. True or false? Each nanometer of all 300 recognizable colors in the visible spectrum are composed from the 3 primary colors red, yellow, and blue, subtractively, and by mixing these colors of paint, you can achieve every other color in the rainbow. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. The 3 primary colors of the rainbow are not red, yellow, and blue, subtractively in paint. The 3 primary colors, as identified by science, are CMY, which is cyan, magenta, and yellow. From these 3 colors, we are able to get every other color, including the previously believed primary colors, red and blue. These are achievable using cyan, magenta, and yellow. True or false? A cab service named QuickStudy trademarks the name QuickStudy, a software developer offering defragmentation services to speed up your internal processes on your computer, wants to establish a company by the same name. This is illegal and considered trademark infringement because the name has previously been trademarked. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. This would not be trademark infringement because they are 2 separate businesses in different fields. They are not under the same category of trademark. True or false? It is illegal in Indiana to catch a fish with your bare hands. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. True. It is illegal in Indiana to catch a fish with your bare hands. True or false? A burglar observes the door to a house cracked open. Without causing damage to the door, he proceeds to nudge it open and look around. Although he has trespassed, the man would not be charged with breaking and entering because he didn't break a lock on the exterior encasement, which was secured to conceal the interior. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. A cracked door being nudged open is still considered breaking and entering because you are using force to enter somebody else's establishment. True or false? A songwriter writes a masterpiece and stashes it inside a drawer. The only copy of this music is accidentally sold at a garage sale inside an old desk. A few years later, the purchaser of the desk decides to recruit a church orchestra to perform this piece without permission. The choir records a live performed arrangement of the piece and places it on vinyl for a throwback nostalgic effect. They have accredited the name of the original songwriter and decided to sell their own rendition. This would be considered questionable, but it is not copyright infringement because the piece was found inside of a desk they had purchased, unused. The orchestra earned thousands of dollars off the hit, breathing life into an otherwise perhaps forgotten melody. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. That is copyright infringement. You cannot take somebody else's work just because you found it inside of a desk you purchased. True or false? An 11-year-old girl undresses herself in front of a 40-year-old man and seduces him with a wild tenacity. Although this is considered sexual assault, it would not be considered pedophilia because the 11-year-old was the one who seduced him and she was willing. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. False. This is considered pedophilia. You cannot just have sex with an underage minor because they are willing to do it. True or false? An artist used 5 Adobe applications to create an independent film, which went viral at a national film festival. While Adobe is not permitted to make use of other films by this studio, they are explicitly entitled to redistribute or create derivative works of the said film because their software was used to create either some or all of the arrangements. Software tool developers share property rights with creators because without their tools, the functioning effects would not have been produced. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. This is false. Just because you create software tools for people does not mean that you now own their work, their ideas, or their arrangements. It doesn't mean that you own anything that they own or create. True or false? A computer programmer for Super Mario felt that the game was being mismanaged and underutilized. Discovering an opportunity to earn some cash, he decides to take his code and parts the project, then launch derivatives of Super Mario under his own LLC to escape the abusive environment of the staff. This was legal because he was a disgruntled programmer and therefore Nintendo forfeited their intellectual property rights and designs because said programmers considered a primary investor in Mario. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. This is false. You do not own Mario because you are a programmer on a project. True or false? A 500-pound woman was photographed for Vogue. Sadly, when her campaign launched, the ads caused a loss of massive amounts of potential grant money and sales because her beauty was considered non-standard to the target audience. Due to this loss of sales, Vogue is entitled to minor rights to these photographs for low-end retail, but decides not to pay her because her image was bad for business and caused massive damage to their company. While many may complain of lookism, it is nonetheless legal because the said woman is deemed to have forfeited the rights to her image by being unpopular. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. This is absolutely false. You cannot just take people's property and break contracts and not pay them and still own their photographs because you didn't get the turnout that you wanted from your ad campaign. True or false? A 14-year-old makes use of software engine tools to create functioning prototypes, starring several game designs. The company who coded the engine tools now wants to create a business selling his creative content, but they don't have anything commercial to sell of their own. The software engine developers decide to provide a repository for the kid to upload his games to, and then they proceed to use these game designs to create a second separate business. They call this business by the same name and begin advertising themselves as a game studio by selling access to his art. This was legal because without their tools, he would likely have never been able to create these games. I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with your answer. This is absolutely false. You cannot just take somebody's property because they've used your tools to build something. Again, you cannot just take people's property and create a business and name it by your own name and then begin selling their work to create this business off of their work simply because you created some tools. One of the big fake defenses they use, they rewrite the narrative of how intellectual property and rules work in life. And most people Most people don't understand how life works. So you could tell them anything. Just as I showed to you in the pop quiz true or false earlier, if you don't know how reality works, you can hear something and just assume it's true. Unixmad and Bomber know that most people, especially children, don't understand how anything works. They don't understand how intellectual property works. So what Unixmad and Bomber are doing is they are arguing things that aren't true and have no basis in reality. But when you hear them, you think, oh, that makes sense, it must be true. Because you don't know how life works. Just like in the true or false, where you hear something and your mind thinks, well, that sounds like it could be true, it must be true. It's not true. And this is why it took me until I was an adult to realize this. And it's like, I was always under the assumption that everything they were saying was true. So it was like, even the possibility of questioning everything was already in and of itself an obstacle, because I had already made up my mind that they weren't lying to me. I was a child. I had no clue throughout my entire life that I was literally brainwashed. 3 nebulous ideas that Unixmad and Bomber have been pandering to hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis and presenting them to you as if they are just understood to be common knowledge fact, when in fact, when you analyze them and break them down in a way that you can visualize what the hell they're actually saying, you will then begin to understand how they are using the whole hysteria effect to create a mandala of nonsense, whereby they convince everybody in sight that whatever you touch becomes theirs. They present to you that a programmer equals video game intellectual property owner, and that is false. The programmer does not own the video game in any way, shape, or form. Now, if a programmer donates their services, they are entitled only to a small portion of compensation. Another lie that they present to you as common fact, a total lie, is that game engine equals video game intellectual property owner. And this is false. Video games are created by independent game developers who are their own studio. Now, they might expand their studio to have employees, but every developer, every game project owner is a game studio in and of themselves. This is how tax works. The game engine has nothing to do with video game intellectual property rights. They are presenting these two things as one and the same. It has no basis in reality. They are presenting it to you as if it's just common, indisputable knowledge and fact. Another false fact that they present to you is they claim that server host equals intellectual property owner, and this is also false. And mind you, they are lying about terms and conditions. Before they stole my game studio, everything was uploaded directly through FTP or shared through email. There was never, ever any terms and conditions. And even if there were, you cannot take intellectual property, especially on a massive scale, from a child under the age of majority without a written contract and consent from their parents. Let me just explain to you that Graal Online game engine, this is one business. It's a separate business from Graal Online games. There are so many game engines, and it's a much more competitive market. Stefan and Unixmad knew that this business was going to fail, so they had to conspire to steal my game studio, separate business, which they named the same name to trick people. I will talk about that in a little bit. Let me just explain to you how the Graal Online game engine is a failed business. There are so many game engines people can use to build their games. These game engine developers, the software owners of these game engines, do not own the game studios or the games or any of the content that people make, that developers make with their game engines. It's a competitive market. They are supposed to make money off of the software or some other way. They were unable at the time to make money off of it. Let me explain to you how many game engines there are, and you will see why they stole games from a kid and created a separate fake business that actually technically belongs to. They stole my game studios, what they stole. I will just list for you all of the available game engines that you could create your game with, and you will see why Graal Online engine was failing. It's a failed business. Game engine list. 4A engine, A-Frame, Adventure Game Interpreter, Adventure Game Studio, Alamo, Aleph 1, Allegro, Antarvad GX, Anur, Anvil, App Game Kit, Ardor 3D, Aurora Toolset, Big World, Blend for Web, Blender, Bork 3D Game Engine, B-Render, Build Engine, Buildbox, C4 Engine, Cafu Engine, Chrome Engine, ClanLib, Clausewitz, ClickTeam Fusion, Cocos 2D, Cocos 2DX, Cocos 2D HTML5, Codia, Coldstone, Construct, Coppercube, Core 3D, Corona, CPAL 3D, Creation Engine, Cry Engine, Crystal Tools, Crystal Space, Cube, Cube 2, Sauerbraten, Dagor Engine, Dark Engine, Decima, Defold, Delta 3D, Dim 3, Dimension X, Multiplayer Engine, DX Studio, Dunia Engine, Ego, Electron Toolset. You know what? I'm not going to go through this whole list here. I am only in the letter E. This goes down to the letter Z. There are that many game tool engines out there. Graal Online Game Engine is a failing business. They couldn't compete. Their next objective was, how could they steal games from game makers and community and start making money off of it? So they saw a child, and before the child could understand how business works, they stole his game studio and renamed it to Graal Online Games. They must have been sitting around thinking, well, Unixmad can't sell this Zelda ROM, which has a bunch of people's stuff littered into it. So Cyberjord doesn't exist, it's not making money. Nobody's going to buy this game engine. We can't possibly sell this game engine. We can't compete. There's all these other game engines. Nobody wants to buy our software. If we could only get a hold of a game that one of the game studios has created over the past 2 years that we've been trying to sell this game engine, we could take that game and start selling the content, and we could just become a game studio. And so they must have realized there's no way that anybody's going to just give us a game, because games cost upwards of $250,000 to purchase for the intellectual property rights, because games have the capacity to rake in millions of dollars. Even like things like Angry Birds make millions of dollars. They knew that they couldn't just get anybody to fork over a game to them. So they said, well, how are we going to get a game? We can't sell anything. We have nothing to sell. Nobody wants to buy any of our stuff. We're failing. How are we going to get a game from somebody so that we can sell this? And so they were looking at me, and I remember they were pretending to be my friend on ICQ. And they must have thought, well, here's this kid. He's just a kid, and he thinks we're his friend. He spent years creating his games. He's the leader of these game projects. We don't want to spend years creating a game. We want to make money now. And he has no idea how anything in life works. It's a fucking child who plays games and makes games all day. This kid has no clue what intellectual property is. We can tell him anything. If we can get him to upload his files onto your computer, we'll just tell him that that equals intellectual property transfer. And if he disputes it, we'll threaten him, ban him, and turn everybody against him because he's a kid and he can't do anything about it, and everybody's gonna believe us because we're adults. I am going to use 2 game engines here to illuminate to you exactly what is happening here and has been happening. Here you see Unity. There are 6 different game studios listed here for you, which all make use of the Unity engine. Unity does not own these game studios. Unity does not own these games. These games are made by different studios. These are independent studios who make use of game tool engines to create games. Those games then make money for the game studio. Unity does not own the game studios. I'm going to say that for you again. Unity does not own the game studios, and Unity does not own the games. Here we have the Unreal Engine. The Unreal Engine is a game engine used to create games by independent game studios. Here we have 6 different independent game studios with 6 different games that have been created. Unreal does not own these game studios. Unreal does not own these games. All of these games are owned independently by the independent game studios. The independent game studios make that money for themselves. Unreal Engine does not own these game studios. I will say that for you again. Unreal does not own these game studios. Unreal does not own their games. Here we have the Graal Online Game Engine. 5 different game studios. We have 6 different games listed. One of these games is illegal. The Graal Online Game Engine does not own these games. The Graal Online Game Engine does not own these game studios. These are independent game studios who made use of a game engine to create different games that they could use for their game studio. Giovanni Legend, who is known for creating NPulse. The separate one we have Liquid Ice, who is his own sole proprietor, who had created Unholy Nation. And the list goes on and on. Blade VT for Delteria. Then we have Antago, who created Destiny. Antago is his own game studio. He was not a contracted employee of Graal Online. He was not a contracted employee of Cyberjord. He's not an indentured servant. He's not a blood relative of these people. He's not in any contract with these people. He is not a slave. These are his games. This is his game studio. It doesn't matter what anybody else says or agrees with. By law, the developer of a game is their own game studio. In what universe does somebody spend over a year, almost 2 years, creating a game only to give it away to some random ass stranger, to some random ass ungrateful stranger who is known for stealing games from Nintendo? In what universe does that constitute a donation? What are you fucking talking about? He is not a charity. money? How are these guys passing themselves off as some magical charity who just receives people's hard work for nothing? If that makes sense to you, please revert back to the pop quiz. If you trace back to the day before they stole my game studio, you will see that up until they stole my studio and started selling my games, there was a program called the G server, which means that they were advertising Graal Online as a game engine to independent studios. You could host your own servers without ever having to talk to Unixmad. These were game engine tools for independent game studios. When they stole my game studio, they said, wouldn't it be great if we killed off the competition as well? If we killed off the competition for this new game studio we stole and forced all of the game studios we were allowing to host their own servers to no longer host their servers themselves, but we shut down the G server and we make them sign terms and conditions so that if they want their game to work, they have to sign it over to us in a contract so that we now own their games. Before they stole my studio, this did not exist. There were no terms and conditions. They had to steal a studio, a game studio first, in order to force people to sign their games away to that studio. Because you can't make money with nothing to sell. The game engine wasn't making money. They had to steal a studio in order to shut down the G server and force the other studios to sign their games over to that studio. They stole my studio and renamed it to Graal Online, a second trademark, and filed it under the tax ID of Cyberjor. That is Antago Press. That is my game studio, 100%. And this is why you can't say my name. Here we have the Graal Online business as it was, not making any money. Freeware, trying to compete with hundreds of other game engines to make money off of game studios who would hopefully purchase their software. And because their business was failing, because it's pathetic, they wanted to steal games so that they could start selling content and pretend that they were a game studio. But they weren't a game studio. So let's just take a look here at what Graal Online actually is. We have the Unity game engine, we have the Graal Online game engine. The Unity game engine is a successful game engine. It has a network manager, a timeline, a post-processing FX, integration with Maya, 3ds Max, shader graph, VFX graph, level designer for prototyping, lighting, video tools, audio tools, C-based scripting, professional assets packages. Let's take a look at this so-called successful Graal Online business, which I can tell you right now, you are being lied to. It is a failed business. They stole my game studio, and that is where the success came from. The Graal Online engine, it comes with a G server manager, which they discontinued in 2001, so they don't even have that. NPC server manager, which you now have to pay for, and they also stole that idea from myself, but I'm not going to go into that because that's beside the point. Low-end GANI timeline. No post-processing FX, no integration with Maya or 3ds Max, no shader graph, no VFX graph. There's a generic tile editor for prototyping with tiles that were made either from myself or from tiles that they ripped out of a Zelda ROM, meaning that they offered you absolutely nothing other than some generic tile editor with some janky-ass tools, and then claimed that they owned your life. Fake lighting effect. No video tools, no audio tools. Low-end C-based scripting. Illegal assets packages. Then, after they started selling my game studio, they added a couple new features to the software and they pretended that somehow this was making them money, and yet the Graal Online engine developer tools were still free and still are fucking free. And when they charge for them, it's only for hosting and they're not making any money. So if you want to know how Unixmad is a total fucking scam artist, a liar, a failure, and a fraud, and Stefan, you will see it in this outline as we break down these two different companies, and you'll see how they stole a child's future from him so that they could get rich by doing nothing. They didn't want to be failures anymore. So instead they stole somebody else's life and made that person a fucking failure. And when they couldn't get away with it, they slandered him, they banned him, and character assassinated him. I mean, these people didn't just steal Zelda. They also stole Bomberman and Tetris. Do you really think that they bothered getting the intellectual property for the games that they stole? I mean, if they had the audacity to rob multi-million-dollar games from Nintendo, they stole game projects from a child. Why do you think they are where they are today? The fact that these people didn't even create this stuff, or even let alone any bit of it, and they are legitimately denying anybody the ability to cash in on their property, and they never paid for it, and they never got the intellectual rights to it, and they are threatening you with lawsuits and character assassination. obsessively staking claim with in such a greedy, materialistic way over your art, over children's intellectual property and creations? Like, what kind of a sick pervert is like, give me your toys, child? Who the fuck does that? Like, if this was in real life and they were acting like that, you would laugh your ass off. But when it happens online, you get scared because it's like the computer screen confuses you and you don't even realize what the hell's happening. They're just like these old ass creeps who like lure children in with Disney toys and Nintendo toys that they don't own, that they're stealing and pirating, and then, you know, like acting like the boogeyman in your closet if you so much as sneeze in their direction. Like, it's so ridiculous if you really think about it. And when you remember, because this is common knowledge, that these are the same people who stole Zelda, Bomberman, and Tetris, of course they're going to threaten you. What kind of a psychopath says, how dare you touch your stuff? How dare you ask for money for your stuff? You are a greedy, no good, lying little child. You piece of unworthy, contributing player shit. Like, who does that? Because that's really what's happening here. Like, I mean, honestly, if we can just stop sugarcoating a whole pile of fucking shit and just, like, put it blatantly, that's what they're basically doing. That is what they're doing. You child, how dare you ask for fucking stuff for your stuff? How fucking dare you? I will fucking ruin you. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Get back in your fucking closet where you crawled out of and quit talking to me. Just a quick graph breaking down the fact that Graal Online is a failed business as an engine, and that the studio, which they cleverly named the same name but is a separate business, a business that they stole, you can see that Graal isn't even on the graph. Not even close. I can tell you that there's like a bunch of other items that I didn't even list because they wouldn't even fit on the graph, and Graal wasn't even on there. Graal is a failed business. They had to steal a game studio because their engine was a failed investment. They thought they were going to make money off of this game engine, and they said, fuck, we better just steal a studio now. Let's start aiming for children because they can't defend themselves and we won't have to pay for anything. And if they protest it, threaten them, slander them, and ruin their lives. Here we have a breakdown of the two different businesses as they are by a similar trademark, but they are actually two separate trademarks, which I will show for you in a little bit. We have the Graal Online engine. We have the Graal Online games. The Graal Online engine is a failed business. A prospective annual revenue would be around $3,200 per year, which is not even enough to live on. Graal Online Games, which was built off of my games, they stole my game studio and called it Graal Online Games, is now making an annual revenue of around maybe $1.2 million. And over the past 20 years, it has made an exponential amount of money. And so we have one business being called Graal Online and a separate one being called Graal Online, and they're pretending it's one business. Here I have copied and pasted for you the two separate trademarks, 100% proving to you that Graal Online is not one business and never has been since 2001 when they stole my studio. Graal Online is two separate businesses with a homonymous mark. What that means is that it's the same mark, so that they're pretending like they created all of these things when in fact that they did not. Graal Online Engine Tools is filed under IC 009, which is US 021, 023, 026, 036, 038, and this is interactive entertainment game software. Trademark number 2. It's an organization of games. This is a game studio. This is IC 041, US 100, 101, 107. These are two separate businesses, two separate trademarks, with a homonymous mark. They are pretending these are one business. They are pretending that the engine was successful and that they created all of these things, when in truth, the first trademark is a failure. The startup revenue for this would have brought in an estimated $320 per year. That is an astronomically impoverished amount of money to be earned by any business. Graal Online Entertainment, which is the game studio, my game studio that they stole and renamed to Graal Online and trademarked separately by the same name to pretend like it was all one big business and to confuse people who don't know how business works, is my game studio. This game studio was built off of my intellectual property. It is about game publishing. These people had no games to publish or sell. We know this because Graal 2001 is my game. This was the first game that built this game studio, including Destiny, which they mashed into Zelda 3, which they then later sold. And they used that to advertise to bring people into the second trademark as well, which was mostly my content. Here we have the testimony of Ludia and Square Enix, completely proving that there is a major difference between game engines and game studios. And we know this because they're separately filed trademarks. We know this because this is how business works. This might be news to you, but it doesn't make it made up. This is how life works. Ludia said, choosing to migrate to Unity was one of the best decisions we made on the Jurassic World Alive project. It gave us the features, flexibility, and support we needed to deliver a major title on time and on budget, and we never looked back. Are you telling me that Unity now owns Ludia and Jurassic World Alive? That these game studios and their games now belong to Unity because they switched game engines? That's what you're telling everybody in Graal. This is brainwash, what they're doing to you. They are slandering everybody in the community and pretending this is how life works. Here we have Square Enix saying, moving to Unity for mobile really helped focus on crafting compelling experiences instead of spending critical time building engines. Are you telling me that Unity now owns Square Enix in every game that Square Enix makes or has made, especially if it was made using the Unity engine? You're telling me that Unity can now steal Square Enix games and start advertising them as Unity. They can steal the Square Enix game studio. Unixmad stole a game studio from a child because he couldn't fucking do anything about it and he didn't know anything about it. They stole my fucking life. Now, if you take a look at this image, you'll see the breakdown of the content that built the game studio. This accounts for 99.99% of all of the money that has ever been made in Graal. The software is not making any money. The software is free. They are selling publication from the game studio and access to that content. The money is coming from access to the content from the game studio. This has nothing to do with the first trademark, which is Graal Online Engine. They had no money to make. They stole a studio from one of the developers in the community and then pretended it was all the same thing by calling it the same name. And they know that most people just don't understand business, so they would just assume because they say it's the same business that somehow all this stuff is just whatever they say it is. When you break it down and you look at the situation from an expert opinion, you can see that they stole a game studio. The content. First and foremost, Graal 2001 is my game. This built the business. This was the first pay-to-play game. Graal Classic is the game that they advertised alongside that, which wasn't pay-to-play yet, but it has been pay-to-play for a very long time from what I now know. Graal Classic and Graal 2001 are the games that built the studio. What we have is a sandbox server of Zelda 3, which is a modge podge of content from me, my friends, other people we knew, random people, and Nintendo, mixed with Destiny. When they started advertising themselves as a game studio, this is the content that they were offering. This is not Unixmad's company. Unixmad had to steal a company because he doesn't want to work. He's a lazy, fucking no good parasite who sucks off of humanity and doesn't want to contribute. He doesn't want to contribute to humanity. He only wants to devour it for himself. He's a drug addict. This guy is a liar and a child predator, and Stefan Noor is just as terrible as he is. Stefan recruits evil people so that he can scapegoat them. Stefan will tell you, oh, Unixmad did it and I'm a victim. Actually, I was there. Stefan moved to Paris to steal my game studio with Unixmad after they got a hold of my files because his engine failed. So they launched themselves as a game studio. Stefan signed the rights of the engine over to Unixmad, and Unixmad agreed to pay him the money that my studio was making. Because Stefan wasn't making money off of the engine, Stefan signed the engine over to Unixmad in exchange for money from my studio that they would then begin to steal. Because they knew that the studio was going to make money right then and right there. That is why Stefan moved to Paris and signed the engine to Unixmad in the first place. Do you think that Unixmad can just steal an engine from a grown adult like that? Like, how does Unixmad just steal an engine? Stefan's whole narrative that he was somehow victimized by ethereal forces of this, Superman named Unixmad who has powers over Jesus Christ himself and nobody can beat, not even Google. All that stuff is made up, dude. Like, you can't just steal people's software. Unixmad got the software because he bribed Stefan if Stefan would steal my game studio with him and move to Paris to sell my stuff. Can we like just look away from our computer screen long enough and just realize like this is Unixmad literally sitting in a fucking dorky computer chair typing away on a computer like a fucking weirdo, probably, you know, sipping on coffee with trash laying around the desk, probably filling up in his trash can because he's too fat and lazy to empty it. You know, there's probably all kinds of dirty stuff laying around, just greasy fucking keyboard and greasy mouse. Just some nerd, some weird person, just some nerd, some person with no talent, saying to you, how fucking dare you think that you get anything from anything that is yours? I will sue you and ruin your life. Who says that? What kind of a person says that? What kind of a person embodies that kind of a malicious, perverted, destructive, ungodly, disgraceful, delusional, illogical, rotten, evil, worthless kind of persona on a daily basis and passes it off as normal, passes this off as not highly suspect in any way, shape, or form? I think most people get stunned by the threat and that their mind goes into defense mode, and the first thing in the fight or flight mode is, I better get away from them or shut up. And so when you're stuck in that fight or flight mode because you're being threatened by some weirdo, you know, staking claim over your stuff for no reason, I mean, what kind of a person does that? Like, who just takes people's stuff and says, if you touch that, I will sue you right now? Thanks so much for listening. Leave a comment below, and if you liked the video, please hit like, then click subscribe to stay connected to this channel in the future.